Hey everyone, today's video covers a few different Amber Sapphire Midrange lists with a special spotlight on some fun villain decks. I'll show off my midrange list first, and then a villain's version of it, and finally a Rise of the Floodborn evolution of that deck, based on new cards we'll be seeing very soon from Lorcana's second set. The focus in the video today is on a more fun theme and a bit of deck theory crafting, rather than something super competitive, but I think you'll enjoy the video, especially if you're interested in off-meta decks or exciting new ideas coming very soon in Rise of the Floodborn. I'm recording this on Halloween, which is probably why villains decks have been on my mind lately. But before we dive into the lists, I hope you've all had a fantastic spooky season this year. Mine's been a bit chaotic, but the last couple weeks have been amazing. I'm finally back from 2 exciting weeks in Florida. First in Miami at Miami TCG Con and PPG's incredible 200-person event. I truly loved meeting a ton of different players and creators in the Lorcana community, and it was great to connect and just play in person with people who love Lorcana. After Miami, my wife and I bounced up to Orlando and spent the week at Walt Disney World celebrating our 5th wedding anniversary. And we just had a blast in general. I love taking Disney trips. And I took a good bit of video from both weeks. So if you guys are interested in some sort of loose vlog or highlight type video of everything Lorcana and Disney related from that Florida trip, let me know and I might be able to piece together something fun for the channel. But beyond that, I'm excited to be back home and finally making more Lorcana content. I'm hoping to amp up the pace leading up to and throughout Rise of the Floodborn, so stay tuned for that. As for today's video, I want to show off an Amber Sapphire Hades villain deck. Villains haven't had too much attention in the first chapter, but I think that could change in a big way going into Rise of the Floodborn. As far as Lorcana Chapter 1 goes, today's villains deck is a fun off-meta list. It builds off a strong foundation of the popular and successful Amber Sapphire midrange decks we've been seeing over the last few months. And after I show off the current Set 1 deck list, I'll dive into an updated Rise of the Floodborn version that really takes advantage of some exciting new cards. I think several villains deck ideas have potential going into Set 2, but Amber Sapphire tends to be overlooked. I haven't seen as much buzz surrounding that particular ink combo, so let's dive in and check out the deck, starting with a more typical Amber Sapphire midrange deck. This is my standard midrange list that's become my favorite. As expected, it seeks out a powerful character-focused mid-game with Amber card draw and Sapphire ink ramp. As a quick overview, on turn 3 you aim to play out Mickey Detective to skip from 3 ink to 5 on the next turn, and follow up with your strong mid-range characters like Maleficent Uninvited. Over the next few turns, cards like Rapunzel, Robin Hood, or Surfer Stitch will help you draw cards, while Hades, Infernal Schemer, and Let It Go will help with board control. Belle is also a great addition to help against whole new world decks. If you feel one looming, you can begin inking quickly and preparing for a fresh hand. This is my recommended list that I think is strongest, but there are a few other options to consider if you'd like. You could run an extra copy or 2 of a 1-cost character with Flounder, extra ramp with Grandma Tala, board presence with Maximus, or a bit of disruption with You Have Forgotten Me. But other than a few variations like that, this is a super solid deck for anyone wanting to play a nice mid-range deck. And I'm sure a lot of you watching have likely already played a variation of Amber Sapphire like this. But today is Halloween, or at least it is for me recording, so I gotta spook it up a bit. And after all, this deck already runs 8 copies of Hades, so why not add in 4 more? It definitely seems like an odd choice, but hear me out. One of the more interesting aspects of the deck that I haven't mentioned yet is Eye of the Fates. This card allows you to add a bit more questing strength to a character, and it works well in Sapphire lists that ramp up ink, allowing you some wiggle room to place these down as you curve up throughout the game. But you can also use it a bit more aggressively. For 4 ink in the late game, you can often find an opportunity to slam it down for a surprise +1 quest. Or for 8 ink, you can really surprise someone with 2 played down at once. Now that's not nearly as common of an occurrence, but it's a fun idea that got my gears turning about that style of play, especially the element of surprise from the additional lore gain. So I wanted to take that idea and bring it to reality with Hades, King of Olympus. He's a beefy Floodborn character that quests for 1, plus 1 more for each other villain in play. His ability to shift in and quest immediately based off villains on board can be strong, especially considering opponents may not see it coming, as the deck may appear initially as a typical midrange deck. So here's version 2 of the deck, a bit more villainous now. The first update is to add in more Sapphire or Amber villains, even though we don't have many. We of course added in Big Hades in place of Eye of the Fates and Phil, and at the 4 ink cost slot, Belle is removed for Maleficent, Sinister Visitor. She's not a bad 4-drop by any means, and of course she grants Hades another villain buff if on board. At the 6 ink cost slot, Rockstar Stitch gets benched for Scar Mastermind, another villain whose ability is perfect for this deck. He's similar to Maximus in that he can open opportunity for your other characters to challenge in without being banished in the process. This is even more important than usual because your goal here is to keep villains healthy and on board, ready to boost Hades when he joins the fray. Now, I don't want to overhype the concept here. This is still a deck that's reliant on at minimum 8 inkable cards, 4 being very high cost and relying quite a bit of setup to be worth it. And that alone means the deck will be at least a bit clunky, and at worst, pretty inconsistent with low impact. And that tends to be the general sentiment around King of Olympus so far in the first chapter. However, I do think it's well overdue that villains deserve some love. So go try out the deck and let me know what you think. I've been playing it a bit with friends and it's been a blast so far. It's a refreshing mix between a very competitive shell of a deck with an off-meta and fun theme woven throughout. But that's not the end of the story, because very soon Rise of the Floodborn will be here. And with it comes some exciting tools for this deck that has potential to push it from a fun pick to something more competitive. We're diving into speculative territory here, but I think it's super fun to try to predict what could be a really strong combo going into the next set. And at the very least, we know the deck will have 2 new villains, the Queen Commanding Presence and Gaston Intellectual Powerhouse. But what could really transform the deck is the potential for each of these new Floodborn characters to have a new, smaller shift target. Ideally, a smaller Sapphire Gaston or a smaller Amber the Queen would be an inkable 1 or 2 cost character, allowing the deck to look something like this. PhD Gaston comes in as a 6 cost replacement to Robin Hood, providing similar stats and card draw, while being able to come in on a shift for earlier guaranteed draw and some aggressive questing. And of course, he's another potential villain that can boost Hades' King of Olympus. Meanwhile, the Queen adds some spice with her strength swapping ability. This ties in perfectly with the deck, echoing the powers of Scar and Maximus that allow you to trade in without losing your villains on board. Suddenly, this deck starts looking quite aggressive in the early to mid game. In the previous iteration of the deck, Hades dropped down later on and threatened the lore gain, but now Gaston and the Queen are quest threats who can shift in quite early. Additionally, with the presence of Gastons, cards like LeFou can be added in for even more early pressure. You could run all 4 copies of Smart Gaston, but for now I've left off 2 and instead added 2 copies of Zero to Hero. I think the future of this card is pretty volatile. I could see this card being a little bit lackluster, or I could see it becoming extremely good, a new Amber staple perhaps. And I think it's worth testing in this deck, because again, if the goal is to keep villains on board, Zero to Hero rewards that and allows for a cheaper way to play out some of the expensive villains like Scar and Hades. Overall, I think this deck list could definitely use some polishing and a lot of play testing, but I think it could be a super fun deck to play, and it's a great way to take an existing deck and build upon it as new cards are revealed. I hope this video gave you some ideas for villains going into Rise of the Floodborn, and I'm excited to see if we do indeed get those low-cost Gastons or the Queen to utilize in this deck. And we still have many other cards yet to be seen that could bolster this list. I think there's around 45 or so cards between Amber and Sapphire yet to be revealed. Stick around because I'll be sure to give an update on the channel here for any great new decks emerging from Rise of the Floodborn. In fact, my next video will be me going over all the different cards that have been revealed since my last update. So drop a comment below and let me know what you're most excited about for the new set. With that, I hope everyone had a great Halloween and spooky season this year. I look forward to the winter holidays and all of the great Lorcana stuff coming down the pipeline. Stay tuned as we dive into Set 2 together. I'll be covering everything Rise of the Floodborn here on my channel with multiple videos per week lined up. So I'll see you then in the next video. Until then, peace.